joining us today are Zoe Williams of The Guardian and Mark Wallace of ConservativeHome. Welcome to you both. And Mark, seems to me there's a certain amount of anxiety here from the Brexiteers, but they may not be having it all their own way.
I think there is a bit of anxiety, and speaking as a Leaver myself, you can't divorce the way people respond to this news from the history of Euroscepticism. 40 years of literally losing everything at every single turn we were defeated, except on the euro. So there is a very deeply ingrained sense of suspicion that you're going to be conned if you win, you're going to be ripped off even if you get through, and somehow this might be taken away. And current events certainly play to that.
I mean, Zoe, you're not the one to accept the 52% saying we won, shut up the 48%.
Well, this kind of direct democracy, the new language of direct democracy, which is we won by a landslide, 4%, you shut up forever, 48% of the country, is not, I have to say, the way I wanted things to go. It doesn't seem to be very consensus-driven, shall we say. The thing is, if we are talking about the Alistair Heath line that Leavers feel like they're going to be conned, they have emerged very querulous. They came out of the referendum very whiny, actually. Considering they won, they haven't stopped whining since they won. And they blame everything on the Remain side, while at the same time telling the Remain side that they're irrelevant. So I haven't got much sympathy with that, but I do have sympathy with the fact that Alistair's saying they haven't got buyer's remorse, they want something to happen. Well, they haven't got buyer's remorse precisely because nothing has happened. So of course you wouldn't regret anything if you can't see any impact of it on your economy. Now, obviously the government is dragging their feet because they didn't have a plan, and they still don't have a plan. But I don't blame the people who voted Leave for having a sort of uncertainty, a kind of disquiet, not just that they might be conned out of their result, but also that they might actually not have remorse because they haven't seen the results.
In terms of what you think you voted for, was it all the way out, basically, all the way down to World Trade Organization rules, no single market?
It doesn't have to be World Trade Organization rules, but it certainly shouldn't be single market or customs union membership. When Vote Leave...
It doesn't leave much, does it?
Well, it leaves a free trade agreement, for example. It leaves the kind of relationship most countries in the world have without having to just rely on...
And going on paying into the EU, as David Davis said this morning?
To a certain extent, that'll depend on the details of the negotiation. There's going to be a lot of back and forth. And also, on Sunday, the Italians are going to, by the looks of it, probably vote no in their referendum and throw a huge spanner into the works of the Eurozone. So we don't know exactly what the EU is going to want out of these negotiations yet either.
But we know enough to know that they treat us with suspicion and hostility now. And I don't think that the Italian referendum is going to make a huge amount of difference to that. They might be in chaos, but they're not going to go, oh, those guys in the UK are really... sensible, sympathetic voice.
Here's a way that it does make a difference. When you say, oh, well, once something changes, then Leavers might start to regret it if there's an impact on the economy. Well, what happens if there's a Eurozone crisis? What happens if Brussels... Do
you think we're going to be unaffected by a Eurozone crisis?
No, of course not. I'm not saying I want a Eurozone crisis either. Exactly. What I am saying is when Brussels is asking its members for more money, when they're talking about banking union, control over taxes and deficits extended as they already are...
Look, we're going to be...
How are voters going to think about
We're going to be poleaxed by Eurozone crisis, just as we would have been if we'd been in the euro in perpetuity.
The whole point is that desire more EU?
It's actually, this isn't logical. The point is, in a global economy, when one bloc has a crisis, as we saw with the American subprime crisis, it affects all of us. And
indeed, which I didn't say it wouldn't affect us.
I
said it would.
This idea, and then if you try and play that as a kind of a reason not to be in the euro, it's preposterous.
The idea that
it's like saying we shouldn't be in the world.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, because being in the world doesn't mean you have to bail out Italian banks, for example. It doesn't mean you have to bail out the Eurozone,
it does seem to me, and this really is Simon Jenkins' article, I have to say I found rather dense, but not stupid, but complex, Simon Jenkins' article. It does feed into this that, if you like, the spirit of British compromise seems to have been abandoned.
I do think there are some problems here, and I think one reason I think it's worth considering that Leave voters were quite aggrieved after the referendum is their experience during and after the referendum was in large part being called racist, being called ignorant old racist who shouldn't be listened to. And I'm afraid that
called everybody a lot of nasty names during the referendum. Indeed. And the difference is Remainers aren't still bleating on about it.
Remainers certainly are still bleating on it. When you say there was this very slim majority, I think it's worth looking at the way way, The Guardian, for example, reports the fact that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in America. Leave won the popular vote by a much higher percentage, by double the percentage that Hillary Clinton won in America. And yet we still hear people say, oh, well, no, Clinton won, she has the rights.
That's a misunderstanding of electoral systems. The reason we talk about the popular vote versus the college vote in America is because the numbers are different. The reason we don't talk about that with the referendum is that we weren't doing it by constituency.
You just did talk about the numbers. You just cited the numbers. You said it's sounding narrow.
No, come on. I need to make my point on this. The referendum was very simple. A number of people voted one way, a number of people voted another way. There was no popular vote versus college vote. There was no popular vote versus first past the post. That is pure obfuscation on your part.
But to dismiss a vote of the largest vote, the largest vote ever in the largest vote ever for anything in British democratic history was for Leave.
All right, what about
quite a small margin.
In your newspaper, Zoe, Sir Simon Jenkins suggesting that actually it's a bit the fault of the Liberals that over-defensive advocacy of minorities led to the sort of polarisation we've seen now.
The thing is, there's something in it, isn't there? When he talks about Richard Rorty, and everybody on the internet has been going wild about this Richard Rorty quote, where this philosopher 20 years ago said, there will come a time when the kind of Rust Belt Americans will rebel
badly educated Americans will get angry about having their manners dictated to them by college graduates.
Yeah, and it did seem to be remarkably prescient, that remark. And there is something in the kind of liberal elite. You get everything you say on Twitter now. Somebody says you're a metropolitan elite. You know, even if you're talking about schools and immigrants in schools and your own kids are at an inner-city London school with a load of immigrants, you're still an out-of-touch liberal elite. And I think we take it too easily. The truth of it is, all that kind of identity politics narrative, the kind of let's try not to be racist, let's not be misogynist, let's not be anti-gays, you know, it actually wasn't that assertive. It was just asserting universal human rights. It wasn't just because you feel alienated by a feminist narrative doesn't mean you've had anything taken away from you. It just means somebody's asking for equality, you don't like it very much. I just reject the idea that because people are kind of rebelling against it, then we should all look into our own souls.
And so this is part of the problem. Identity politics is not the same as let's not be racist. You can be not racist, not anti-gay, without indulging in identity politics.
Well, so what do you call identity politics then?
I think you can see a good example of identity politics in what David Aronovich writes about in The Times, where you find that some people, because of their perceived self-identity on the left as progressives, were willing to apologise for Fidel Castro, someone who put gay people into camps, who was a homophobic dictator, because their identity politics led them
You're missing the point
to
completely. What Simon's talking about is the people who actually make it a badge of honour to be a minority. That's nothing to do with the left.
Or a champion thereof. I'm sorry. Identity politics has become a left-wing disaster.
It just strikes me that Fidel Castro in Britain is probably a bit of a non-event. But anyway, thank you both very much indeed. This is All Out Politics coming up.